chapter 5. They came to the other side of the lake, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now there was a hillside and a great herd of swine that was feeding. And the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned in the lake. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
Good morning. How are you? Good. Me? Yeah, I'm still fine. That scripture made me think reminded me that we are legion, those who suffer from depression and other mental illnesses. We are legion. We're everywhere. But let's talk a little bit about that. Can you have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to take you through a journey of a disease. It's a life-threatening disease. It's called depression. I have a life-threatening disease. The darkness of depression is what you can do and what you can do to bring some light to one who suffers. This is the experience of my life. I'll be showing some pictures of people who all have something in common, and we'll talk about them later. Loren Scott, fashion designer. Roman Filipov, Russian fighter pilot. Those lucky ones who haven't been exposed to depression either in yourself or in a family member or friend may be thinking, "I don't get it. What's the big deal? You just pick yourself up from a bad mood or some sadness and get on with it." For the clinically depressed, that's just not possible. Sunny days really don't make any difference, and for me, sometimes bring guilt feelings due to the fact that I really can't enjoy the beautiful day. I should be enjoying it, but I just can't. The brain disorder called depression is caused by an imbalance in brain chemistry. In much the same way, diabetes is caused by a metabolic imbalance. Some believe depression is not a real physical disease and can be fixed by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, but this is not the case, just as diabetes can't be fixed like that either. Physical symptoms can include sleeping too much or too little, fatigue, headaches, digestive problems, and body pains. It robs you of physical and mental energy, contributes to the formation and worsening of other diseases, and costs millions in healthcare dollars and lost productivity every year. But it's one of the hidden diseases without visually obvious clues. And depression lies. The negative, lying thoughts rob you of your confidence, your self-esteem, and belief in yourself and your abilities. Hillary Kate Cuizon, high school student. Jacob Leppert, son of a high school friend. Kate Spade, fashion designer. I recognize it's not easy to imagine what depression feels like if you've never felt it, so I'll try to describe it for you. This is my experience because I only know what I've felt, but I imagine the experience of others may be similar. Depression runs on both sides of my family. My dad's brother Ken, an alcoholic, killed himself, and my aunt on my mother's side was also a depressed alcoholic. Frequently, people with mental illness try to feel better by self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, which usually doesn't work. In the not too recent past, I was drinking a lot of alcohol daily in an attempt to numb the pain. Thankfully, my body decided that drinking wine was not the thing to do and started rebelling by giving me wicked headaches anytime I had wine, regardless of the amount. Jean Wood, mother. Brandon Hickson, member of the Idaho legislature. Anthony Bourdain, raconteur. My journey with depression started when I was fairly young, most likely when I was in 6th grade and we moved to a different part of town. The transition to a new school was difficult for me, and I believe that our move was the trigger which allowed depression to surface. Junior high and high school were really hard, and I was bullied and remember withdrawing and not talking for days. I also remember talking to my mom about my unhappiness and thoughts of suicide. I think she sympathized with my pain, but wasn't equipped to really understand the depth of my anguish. So because of a lack of true understanding of my problem, no help was offered. I found out much later that she felt counseling was fine for other people. That explained a lot. The first time I thought about suicide was in junior high. College went reasonably well, but still had many low points and struggles. It was a dynamic time with lots of stimulation and new people, so the distraction helped to mostly keep my depression at bay, and so did all the walking around campus. One day on my way to class, I remember thinking, gee, I feel happy. It's still very vivid in my mind exactly where I was, and I imagine that's because it was such a novel thought. Sylvia Plath, not Stephanie Adams. Doris Clift, mother. Vincent van Gogh. But it was after college, in my 20s, when I knew I was really in trouble. I stopped eating for long periods of time and barely managed to get to work, only to come home and sit in the dark. As time went on, I managed to muddle through life, but it was so tiring. It took so much energy to seem normal. The morning when I was still in my jammies and my long, thick hair had dried in the bath towel again, which took hours and hours, for the umpteenth time, was when I realized there's something really wrong here. I sought out help, which was very hard to do, and was put on medication, which helped a bit. Over the years, my antidepressants have been changed numerous times, and in the meantime, I gave counseling a try since it said that meds and counseling are the most effective treatment. But after trying many counselors, I've never had much success with that. I've called the crisis line more than once. It's been over 40 years of living like this, trying a new medication or a new counselor with the hope that something will have a long-term positive effect. I've tried what the experts suggest without much help, so I continue to drag along in a day-to-day life full of the struggle. Now, I do get the difficulty of trying to understand the feeling of long-term depression if you've never felt it. Really, I do. Sometimes when I'm feeling good, even I forget what it's like. So let me draw a picture of my experience that might help with understanding. Envision a deep, dark earthen hole or pit. Now imagine yourself in this pit with no way out. You're just sitting there, paralyzed by the darkness. Light doesn't penetrate very far into the hole, and certainly not down to where you are. At some point, you notice a rope ladder that someone has dropped down the side. Some days you can't even reach the first rung, or don't have the energy to even try. On other days, you might be able to grab the second or third rung. And sometimes you might get halfway up, but the effort has been exhausting, and you can't go any further, and what's more, you feel your hands slipping. In the meantime, family and friends are up above, living life, while you're stuck in the pit. Occasionally someone looks in or waves as they go by, but it's unusual for anyone to stop and holler down to see how you're doing. This is the darkness of my depression. This is at the point at which I find myself feeling that God has forsaken me. It's hard to pray, and it's hard to believe that God is with me. Miyako Sumiyoshi, Japanese Olympic speed skater. Kenneth Zilk, uncle. Chris Cornell, musician. One more thing before we talk about the people and names on the screen. In the past few months, I've been feeling pretty good. But all of a sudden, I began to slide back into the pit. Not as far as I was previously. It's a slide, and I am so disappointed. I don't want to be in the pit. This backward slide made it more difficult for me to prepare this talk. Last time I spoke about this, I felt I had been given a directive by God. I woke up in the night, and there it was. I started writing right then. I wasn't given a choice. It was an assignment I had to complete. This time was different, and it weighed on me. I wanted to speak again, but I didn't feel as driven, and it took a lot more effort. But depression is a jagged line. Sometimes you move forward, but there can be backsliding, and you just have to hold on during the slide into darkness. Now, about the pictures. Do you know what all these people have in common? What is it? Suicide. You're right. Depression and other brain disorders can be life-threatening diseases. There are familiar celebrity names among them: Chris Cornell, Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain. But there are others whose names are only familiar to their families and friends: Jacob Leppert, Kenneth Zilk, Jean Wood, Doris Clift. Some passed fairly recently, like Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain. Others several years ago, and still others took their life many years ago. They come from all walks of life, wealthy and not, highly educated and uneducated, successful and unsuccessful. Depression cuts across all economic levels and doesn't discriminate as to who suffers. I have a friend who's attempted suicide 13 times since age 12. I feel for him, and I am so glad he hasn't succeeded, because he's a really wonderful man. Several years ago, a man jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. Only a handful have survived that jump. He spoke with media and said, the second his hand left the bridge, he changed his mind. And he didn't want to die, but it was too late. He was already falling. He is grateful to be alive. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. When Robin Williams died, there was a huge outcry about how tragic it was and how there needed to be more talk and pulling away of the shroud that keeps suicide and depression in the dark corners. Well, the outcry has faded until the next beloved celebrity just can't see a solution to the darkness of their life. But the problems still remain as a daily struggle for many, me included. Why do people think about or attempt suicide? First, let me say that not everyone who struggles with depression has considered suicide. I've considered it and had the means to do it, but haven't attempted it because I know I don't really want to die. Negative thinking is a key part of the problem, and for me, it has to do with disaster thinking and psychic pain. I can't see anything positive in the future and don't believe my life will get any better. And the pain is so great that I just want it to stop. When you're in that kind of mindset, it's very difficult to see life in any other way at that moment, and it doesn't seem that anything will improve. Some of what saved me is that I've been able to realize that I do just want the pain to go away. I don't really want to die. That's one reason why I'm still alive. I've also been able to talk to friends and find support in different ways. It was reported that before Robin Williams ended his life, he was despondent about his recent medical diagnosis of an incurable progressive disease. Others see their business world crumbling around them and can't see any way out. Still others have experienced trauma, abuse, or a brain injury that makes life not worth living. But I think the common denominator here is despair. Despair that nothing will ever change and the pain will last forever. A good friend told me about something a counselor said to her very troubled son. She told him to tell himself, "I'll kill myself tomorrow." While this may seem a strange thing to say, It accomplishes one thing. It allows for the passage of time. Time in which the person's view of life may change. Suicide is often an impulsive act, and which is why it's so important to delay the person's suicidal actions. A phrase that has helped me is, "I won't always feel this way." It applies to dark times and good times. The darkness won't last forever, and just hold on till it lessens. The good won't always be there either, so appreciate it now. In my experience, the thoughts of despair and hopelessness can lessen in just a few hours, or it may take longer. But as long as you can get through that extremely dark period without harming yourself and emerge into a lighter place, the thoughts of suicide may diminish, at least for a while. So what can you do to help? Obviously, professional help is suggested when someone is feeling actively suicidal, but a friend or family member expressing care and concern for a depressed person might help keep them from getting to that point. Sometimes it's hard to know what to do to support a person with depression. So let me give you some ideas. First, acknowledge within yourself that whatever you do, it's not going to cure the person's depression. If the person has sort of dropped off the earth, and you haven't seen them for a while, give them a call, which I think is preferable to a text or an email for two reasons. Something written is easy to ignore, and hearing someone's voice might make a difference. Now, I'm not suggesting doing any browbeating, Ask how they're doing. But be aware that the first okay or fine may not be the entire story. Now, I'm not suggesting doing any browbeating to get to the true reality, but be aware that depressed people are some of the best actors you will ever see. And may say they're okay at first, since our society doesn't like people who are not okay. They cover up the reality they live with every day in order to avoid being labeled a downer. However, just by reaching out and talking or arranging an activity, it might give the depressed person a few minutes or hours of lightness or relief from the heavy darkness they are feeling. Sometimes just a bit of lightness can make life a little more bearable for an afternoon or a day. But recognize that a few hours of lightness is just that, a few hours. Don't be surprised if the next time you talk to them, they sound just as down as before. One thing that helps me is having a commitment in the morning, so I have to get out of bed, get dressed, and get out of the house. In my case, getting dressed is huge and very difficult to do if I don't have anywhere to go or someone isn't counting on me to show up. And not getting dressed puts me in a sort of sick mindset. So be ready for initial rejection when you reach out. The depressed person will often say no to any suggested activity or plans because it just takes too much energy to think about. Much less actually do. The daily struggle is so tiring. But don't take the initial no as the final answer. Doing a little pressing might be enough of a push to get the person out of the house and into an activity they enjoy. When this happens to me, I'm usually glad I made the effort and end up having a good time. However, it's a fine line between being too persistent and not persistent enough. I had a delightful elderly friend who always said no to anything I suggested. So I would wheedle her and into agreeing to go, and invariably she would say, "Oh, I'm so glad I went. That was such fun." If you feel the person is really struggling, or if they're talking about suicide, see if you can make a safety pact with them. This involves getting the depressed person to agree to not do anything to hurt themselves before they call you or some other safe person. It can be for a certain period of time, such as 24 hours, or it can be a longer or shorter term agreement. If the person has access to drugs or weapons, ask if you can hold these things for them for a defined period of time. It's really important that it's defined, that you're not taking something away forever. Sometimes this is enough to help the person over the hump of despair into a safer frame of mind. For my safety, I have made a safety pact with someone in the past, and they held all but 1 or 2 tablets of my prescribed painkillers for me until I was in a better frame of mind. But, and this is a big but, if someone is really intent on ending their life, there is generally nothing you can do that will stop them. This is no fault of yours. Sometimes there really is nothing you can do. But for someone who wants the pain to stop but doesn't really want to die, contact with a caring person, perhaps you, may make a huge difference. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow.